Hi.
Hey.
Other works in this style other than your own or that you publish that you'd recommend, that you want us to check out?
No, just buy more copies of our books. Yeah.
March.
March is terrific.
Absolutely.
There's a great book. One of my favorite science books is How to Fake a Moon Landing, which is a great book exploding various hoax, quote-unquote, skepticism about science, like
conspiracy
global,
theories.
yeah,
Right,
blowing
yeah.
up. People who say that global warming is a hoax.
I really like the Nathan Hale Hazardous Tales series.
Yes.
Those are
That's a good
fantastic.
call.
I learned more about World War I from that book than anything else I had in school.
DC did a series called The Big Book of X many years ago, and they touched on all sorts of topics. So it's a lot of kind of weird history. Like there was a big book of the unexplained, the big book of death, talking about methods of death throughout history, different types of executions and stuff. So not all of them are as macabre as that, but it's a compelling slice of history that does not ever show up in a textbook, but gets you intrigued about different eras.
Well, we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the granddaddy of them all, which is Larry Gonick's books.
Oh my goodness,
the
of course,
cartoonist
yes.
of the universe, the cartoonist of America, the cartoonist of
Yeah.
everything.
Larry Gonick is really the godfather of this nonfiction comics universe, and he was a Harvard math professor who liked to draw as well as to teach. He's like, what if I would teach through my drawings and my writing? And then he eventually quit that whole Harvard thing and went into the whole graphic novels full time.
He was discovered his editor was Jackie Kennedy Onassis.
Really?
When he was at
What?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's so great.
See, these guys, they know everything. He did the cartoon history of the universe starting the Big Bang, and I think that the last book in it just came out 3 years ago, something like that. So it's right up to basically the present day. Amazing, top-notch stuff. Anything his name is on is definitely worth checking out.
If I could just hop in real quick, that was my frustration when I first started doing this, was what are the books that are out there, and there wasn't really anything there. So again, the website that I put up there, thehistorycomics.net, all the books that I read, they're all, God help me, they're all the ones that I own. And I write reviews and how you can use them, sometimes lesson plans. And again, that's kind of why I want to do this, is you guys out there can help me, and we can add, and we can all, help our students out together.
I'm working on an interactive comic right now for the Hall of Science, and we've been doing a lot of research around what imagery really appeals to kids, trying to get the broadest audience, and inviting girls a lot into science stories. Have you done any of that research, or have you changed your illustration style at all when you moved to doing education and not just for your own selves having fun?
I have not changed it at all. My drawing style is just as snotty and silly as it's always been, and kids love it. I mean, more jokes is really what kids respond to.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting point is that when we did the comic book history of comics, initially one of the complaints we got, we didn't get a lot of complaints. One of them was more representation of women, and so now as we're bringing back the series, we're now there's a sort of a whole brand new section called Her Story of Comics, and so so we're definitely I don't know if it's so much going to education, but just listening to your readers and saying, hey, I really enjoyed this, but what about this? So in trying to expanding that tent.
In terms of finding art styles that are particularly appealing to girl readers, I would direct you to a lot of graphic novels that are finding lots of readers, and maybe look for art styles that are comparable to, say, the work of Raina Telgemeier or Faith Hicks or Victoria Jameson, who did Roller Girl. We, for Second, has recently launched a graphic novel series for middle grade readers called Science Comics. These are 128 pages each, and each book tackles sort of a different fun topic in science. The first two that we put out were dinosaurs and coral reefs. We're also going to be having some engineering and technology topics. This is a series that we're going to be supporting very aggressively, and we have like 20 of them lined up right now, so it's not going anywhere. But one thing that we're trying to do with this series is make them as aesthetically appealing as we possibly can, because our whole aim with science comics is to make them, just to have a book that, like, even somebody who has been sort of terrorized into thinking they don't enjoy science will look at this book and think that looks fun. That looks like something that's going to be fun. So the aesthetic for us is really important, and that's actually something we think about a lot, is making nonfiction books that look really fun.
Yeah, I mean, you don't judge a book by its cover, but you do. So aesthetics matter. They really, really do. And that's really one of the most powerful arguments for comics as a whole, is that aesthetically it's approachable. Aesthetically, if you are a reader who does not think that you are a strong reader, books aren't your thing, all of a sudden you're not scared. And when you're not scared and you're willing to engage, it's the biggest fight you'll ever have as an educator. And if comics help you win that, then everything else is a whole lot easier.
I'm actually an academic librarian, so I work with college students.
Get out.
I do. And I'm actually not a reference librarian at all. I'm more of a systems librarian, back-end person, but I happen to be really interested in comics. So I partnered up with our social sciences librarian, who's also a comics geek, just like I am, and we're exploring options to use graphic nonfiction predominantly as gateway drugs for new researchers, incoming freshmen, so the high school teacher can actually see which one of you is that person. There you go. We get a lot of comments sometimes in staff meetings about, isn't this the job of the public library, things like that. But we have tons of first, second titles, and I can't speak highly enough for the photographer. And the meeting where I brought the graphic adaptation of the 9/11 report,
Yes.
that was a very powerful meeting, and we've been approached by loads of students who said that it's actually helped them to understand what happened regarding 9/11. And my university has like a social justice mission. We have programs in like terrorism and social conflict resolution and things like that. So we're really hitting it hard on we have books like Jerusalem and all these others. So if anybody has any comments about working with new researchers and academics, I'd love to hear it.
Are you in touch with Karen Green at Columbia? Okay, look up Karen Green. She's a great resource. She basically built a world-class graphic novel collection and program for the Columbia library system from scratch. They had nothing, and in the last 5 or 10 years, she has built an impressive collection, and she's done a lot of politicking up there to sort of make her case, and she will probably have a lot of really good resources for you.
I'd also recommend Carol Tilley of the University of Illinois.
Yeah.
She's also a librarian, and she works at the library school there at U of I, and wrote a pretty wonderful and very damning dissertation of Frederick Wortham that kind of put her on the radar of all of us. But she's a terrific resource, not only for her own knowledge, but the people that she knows as well.
Hi, it's a little short. This is more of a subjective question, but what would you say would be the quintessential graphic novel that if you heard someone had not ever read, you would pull off of a shelf and just say, here, read this right now?
Action Philosophers by Fred
I think subjective is the key word there, because it really depends on who that person is. You know, I don't know if there is unanswered. It depends on who that person is, where they're coming from, what their interests are.
I would say the one book that people keep giving other people who have not read comics as their first comic and kind of makes them run screaming from comics is Watchmen.
Yeah.
Giving Watchmen and expecting people to want to read more about superheroes is like giving somebody Moby Dick and expecting them to become obsessed with whaling. Don't get me wrong, Watchmen is a brilliant novel and it's a wonderful piece of art, but my first comic, probably not.
Thank you.
For teenagers, my gateway drug comic, and it's pretty reliable, like across all manner of different segments, is a book called Anya's Ghost that first second published maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It's just teen fiction. It's spooky. It's interesting. It's very relatable, and it seems to be like crack. I mean, everybody loves it. I love it. I've never met somebody who didn't love this book. So.
Hello. Well, my question is what advice would you give someone who reads a historical book here and try to translate that to a comic book? Certain steps they have to take. Read the subtext, books give you descriptions of what the person looks like here and stuff.
Right.
Yes.
Well, do you mean literally adapting another book of history or just a historical event?
Well, I guess basically a book. I basically try to turn that historical book into maybe a comic or a comic series.
Well, make sure you have the rights to it.
That's
Number
important.
one, don't just do it on your own, particularly if it's not.
That's a good idea.
if it's written by a living person.
All right.
And Ryan and I do a metric ton of reference research. Google Images is your friend. Sometimes this is really a deep cut, but if you want some like real hardcore research advice, the Wikipedia entries for things, the pictures are different depending on the language. So if you are on something and you don't like necessarily what your options are, the Russian or the Spanish or the French or the Chinese page may have completely different images that are way better than what you're looking at on the English one. So there's a deep cut research
That
pro
is
tip.
so useful.
I was so happy when I discovered that.
So I use that all the time.
Yeah.
Hi. So I'm not an educator, but I'm a parent, and I'm wondering if you have any recommendations or how to approach a school to bring this into the curriculum.
Oh, please do. You have more power than any teacher will ever have. Yes, please do. Have your kids talk to their teachers, but just like you're doing here, go to a school board meeting and say, hey, have you ever thought about? And I'm going to 3 conferences coming up. I'm going to an ed camp. I'm going to the Pennsylvania Social Studies Conference in Harrisburg next weekend and the National Social Studies Conference in Washington, D.C. in December to speak about this. We need to get the message out, but I can do all this all day. You have 100% more authority in the school district than I do as a parent. Please do so. Sorry.
Hi. So I'm also an educator who has a class called Teaching History Through Comics. And I have a question for the educators up there on how they procure comics for an entire class of, say, 30 students. I've used donors' choose, and sometimes, if you don't get it in far enough in advance, it can be, just like a ticking clock, like, okay, I guess I'm not doing that unit because we don't have the funding yet. So do you have recommendations?
Whatever you find out, tell me, because this year I just learned to itemize my taxes because all the money I've been spending on comics. I had the same issue. So
if you partner with, there are 2 groups that you can partner with that would be helpful. First is your public library. They have obviously a pipeline into books, and they have connections that they can point you to. What they will probably end up doing is pointing you towards either a local comic shop, which is a great resource, because if you come in and say, I want to get X number of copies for my classroom and I want this to be a regular thing, more likely than not, they'd be willing to procure them for you at basically their cost. So that's not eliminating the cost, but it is mitigating it to a pretty enormous degree. I'd also recommend, when you talk to those public librarians or a school librarian, if you have one, find out who their distributor is. Who do they talk to when they're making book purchases, and create a relationship with that person in order to get books in bulk as well. And then once you're saying on a Donor's Choose or a similar site that I'm getting all these books, and if I can raise X amount of dollars, I'm going to get them all at cost. So we're going to be able to get, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck when you're making that donation, and that means a lot to donors. As someone who's run a nonprofit, I know that very well. If you can say your dollar is going a lot further than you thought it would, that incentivizes it to give you even more.
Hi, my name is David. I'm just a random person here. I'm not an educator or a parent or anything.
Yay!
But I had a question. I know this might be a little tricky, but I was curious. So, different mediums have different strengths and different weaknesses. So this is just sort of an open-ended question to anyone who's here who's willing to answer. What stories from history do you guys think that haven't been told yet in the comic book form? Do you think the comic book form would be really good for? Just out of curiosity.
I could literally sit here all day answering that question. The one thing that leaps immediately in mind is a comic I want to do for a long time, which is the conquest of Mexico from the Aztecs' point of view. And I wanted to do a graphic novel that was totally told an Aztec story, and where the Spaniards, the conquistadors that were coming were almost like alien invaders. And very Baroque, and their armor was very Baroque, and they seemed very alien and inhuman, and so it was almost sort of Independence Day on Earth. That was sort of the first thing that left to mind. I think that was, and I just think that whole the fall of the Aztecs is a super interesting story.
Now I'm going to feel stupid because I thought a history of video games would be a really cool graphic novel. But,
My son will buy it.
Yeah.
Everybody come by the First Second booth and buy the book that we just published. It's a history of Tetris because it's really good, and it premiered at the show yesterday. So yeah.
So the panel I went to before here, my dream is I can't draw, but I'm a good writer. And so I went to the last session. They were talking about how to get writers to connect to industry, and it was Jim Zub, and I want to write a book on the 442nd, which is the all Japanese American unit that actually volunteered to fight from the internment camps. You want to talk about powerful images. So that's my hope here, is I hook up. If anybody in here can draw, is a good artist, and wants to do something with me, let me know.
Thank you. Yes, how you doing? My name is Andre Warner. I am a middle school social studies teacher at a alternate learning center, which means that my population is a little different than others. They have been suspended 30, 60, 90 days, and it's a transient population. Unfortunately, my principal says that he cannot get comic books. If it's in a graphic novel form, he can get it. But then he gives me some books like March, which is it's a great book for adults, but it's the civil rights movement. And sometimes my students be like, no, I need more than that. But then you give them the Nat Turner, they'll like stuff like that. Moon Girl, Devil Dinosaur, Miles Morales. They all like, where's Ironheart, Riri Williams? They know these characters are coming. But in terms of graphic novels, do you have any other recommendations for middle school in terms of African American or Hispanic female population that you can recommend?
I have a whole page on my website on African American books. Sorry not to jump in there, but that'll help.
Graphic novels?
Graphic novels, yeah.
That's historycomics.net.
Historycomics.net. I should charge for that, maybe.
My principal won't pay for it. So.
There's a really great book that came out maybe 5 years ago called Yummy that I would highly recommend if you haven't read it already. Yeah.
Hello. I am also a middle school social studies teacher, and kind of speaking on behalf of the whole social studies department here. So, in terms of practical application, so what percentage of adding the comics to the classroom would you say that you add to your curriculum? And in terms of them reading them, interpreting them, and possibly creating them?
Everybody looks at me. So I'm lucky enough to work in a district that says you have to teach X and Y, but we have a lot of leeway on how we do that. So we have March is actually in our curriculum. Everything else is me and what I've decided to do, and I change it up every year. And when Batman's getting into Black Lives Matter, that's my lesson for the day. And so we're still teaching the content and the skills, but whatever kind of grabs my eye and my attention, and the kids respond to that, because when I'm excited about something, they get excited about it.
So would you say like in a week you would kind of use it like once or twice, or like I'm just trying to get an idea of how infused it is into your...
We work on a 6-day cycle, so I'll usually work in whether it's either a panel or a comic book or something like that at least once in a cycle. I probably would do more even but that's about it. Probably about once in a cycle.
Okay, thank you.
And one of the great things about comics as a media source is they can be consumed very quickly compared to you assign a big chunk of text or even assign a video to watch, right? Or like watch this movie on this topic. The comic can be read and reread within the same amount of time that they're reading that text once or even watching that movie once. That's a really powerful thing in terms of why don't I just assign the comic as extra reading or just throw it on top of whatever else I'm doing, because there's room for it. The comic will fit. And that's a really neat thing about how comics can be used in the classroom.
Hi, my name's Elmer. I'm a comic artist, actually. I was actually just kind of curious from a creative perspective. When you try to add like a little bit more humor or comedic work to a historical situation, how do you find the right balance between being really honest to the gravity of the situation and throwing in like a hysterical joke every other panel or so?
I can't stop myself. Anytime I see an opportunity to make a joke or a goofy face or draw somebody weird, I do it. And I rely on this guy and other people to tell me, you went too far, which almost never happens.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a real balancing act, and that's sort of one of the interesting things as we're going into doing the kid stuff. Is it is tough to sort of balance the joke with someone taking offense or someone thinking that you're actually saying some of these things happen. So it's just
You want to add it
fine
in.
feel to it,
I found if I'm going to do something funny, it has to be in addition to the foundation of the reality of what we're telling, or the script that Fred's written.
I mean, the tough thing about humor is that oftentimes there's a very thin line between someone saying you're making fun of this and laughing instead of crying. Right? Is humor as an offensive weapon or a defensive weapon? And I think there are different perspectives on that depending on the reader and depending on the artist, and you just have to be super. We've been doing this forever, so it kind of comes second nature. But and particularly when you're starting out with philosophy, which is something most people like to make fun of anyway, so that kind of helped.
That would help.
Like there's a particular image actually in Action Philosophers that's always stuck with me that I felt was additive rather than subtracting or being just a complete non sequitur, which was that Sun Tzu is actually Master Kong, is his
Confucius.
Confucius, yeah, sorry. So it didn't work at all. So we just proved
we failed.
We failed.
Dates and names. We don't like names either. We don't care about names.
Sorry, guys. I did sleep 3 hours last night, so I'm a little off.
Yeah. So Confucius literally is Master Kong in the direct translated Chinese,
and they represent him as King Kong in Action Philosophers, and it's a kind of thing that. There are powerful images that stick with us. There's a term for it, and again, because my brain isn't working right now, I don't recall what it is. But there's this idea that there's sort of a controlling image that will get stuck in your brain, connected to some concept. And once that's there, then it makes it that much easier to pull that image back out, and then the entire associated set of concepts out of the deep morass of your brain. So comics through humor can accomplish that, even if you are kind of going up the reservation a little bit in terms of reality. If it makes it stickier, then that's a win. Again, that's the goal here.
Yeah, the Confucius story is literally just King Kong, but with this huge Confucius instead of a gorilla, and it's just listing the precepts of Confucius over this totally nonsensical plot.
Completely.
It just makes no sense at all. But again, we were not trying to be educational. We were just trying to make ourselves laugh.
So we got just a few more minutes. Unless there's any last questions, do any of you have any other things you want to share out there with these fine people?
I have comics.
Oh, yes, we do, of course. So what better way to spend our last few minutes here than by taking copies of Action Presidents?
One per